For more than 3,000 years, the tomb remained hidden beneath the sands of Egypt. While empires rose and collapsed above it, the dead waited in silence below. Wind carved through the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, burying entrances, erasing pathways, swallowing entire chapters of history beneath stone and dust. Archaeologists searched for decades, convinced one final secret from Egypt's golden age was still missing. Then, deep beneath the desert floor, workers uncovered something impossible: a sealed doorway. Ancient plaster still intact, royal markings barely visible through centuries of decay. In that moment, everything changed. Because the 18th Dynasty was not just another royal bloodline, it was the age of living gods. Warrior pharaohs, monumental temples, vast treasure. The dynasty of Tutankhamun, Hatshepsut, and rulers whose names survived for thousands of years carved into stone. But one pharaoh had nearly vanished from history entirely. No grand monuments, no legendary tomb, only fragments, erased records, broken inscriptions. A ruler lost somewhere between myth and memory, until now. As archaeologists prepared to breach the chamber, the fear was not what they might find, but what might still be waiting inside, untouched after 30 centuries of darkness. Because if the seals were truly unbroken, this would not just be another discovery. It would be the first time anyone had entered the tomb since ancient Egypt still ruled the world. At the height of the 18th Dynasty, ancient Egypt stood among the most powerful civilizations on Earth. Its armies marched across distant lands, gold flowed into royal treasuries from conquered kingdoms. Massive temples rose along the Nile, their walls covered in stories carved for eternity. To the people of Egypt, the pharaoh was not simply a ruler, he was divine, a living bridge between humanity and the gods themselves. And nowhere was that power displayed more clearly than in the city of Thebes. Here, towering columns stretched toward the sky inside vast temple complexes. Priests carried sacred rituals through halls thick with incense and torch smoke. Beyond the fertile banks of the Nile, hidden deep within barren cliffs, the dead kings of Egypt were buried in secret tombs cut directly into the mountains. The place would later become known as the Valley of the Kings. It was designed to protect the pharaohs forever. No towering pyramids marked these graves. No public monuments revealed their locations. Instead, the rulers of the 18th Dynasty vanished into the earth itself, surrounded by treasures meant to guide them into the afterlife. But even then, eternity proved fragile. Tombs were robbed, names were erased, dynasties collapsed, and somewhere beneath the desert stone, one final pharaoh slowly disappeared from history altogether. History remembered the great rulers of the 18th Dynasty almost like legends. The warrior king Thutmose III expanded Egypt into an empire. Hatshepsut covered the land with monuments and temples unlike anything the world had seen. And centuries later, the golden mask of Tutankhamun would become one of the most famous discoveries in human history. But not every pharaoh was granted immortality. Some names faded, others were deliberately erased. Ancient Egypt believed memory itself was a form of eternal life. To carve a ruler's name into stone was to preserve them forever. But to destroy those carvings, to break statues, deface monuments, and remove royal records was a second death, far worse than the grave. And somewhere within the fractured history of the 18th Dynasty, archaeologists discovered signs that this had happened before. Cartouches had been chiseled away. Royal inscriptions abruptly ended. Entire burial records vanished from surviving texts. It was as though one ruler had been buried not only beneath the desert, but beneath silence itself. For decades, historians argued over the missing pieces. Some believed the tomb had simply never been found. Others feared it had already been looted and lost centuries ago. Yet scattered clues continued to surface across Egypt. A damaged inscription here, a forgotten artifact there. Tiny fragments pointing toward a ruler history had nearly erased completely. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A hidden entrance beneath the sands, sealed, undisturbed, waiting in darkness for more than 3,000 years. The search began with dust, heat, and frustration. By the early 20th century, archaeologists had spent decades combing through the cliffs surrounding the Valley of the Kings. Many believed the valley had already surrendered all its secrets. Tomb after tomb had been uncovered, catalogued, and stripped bare by either explorers or ancient robbers long before modern excavations ever arrived. But a few researchers remained unconvinced. The records of the 18th Dynasty still contained gaps too large to ignore. Certain royal burials were never fully accounted for. Some pharaohs seemed to vanish from history without a confirmed resting place. And in a civilization obsessed with death and the afterlife, that absence felt impossible. So the digging continued. Workers cleared layers of broken limestone beneath the brutal Egyptian sun. Buckets of rubble were hauled from narrow trenches day after day with little to show for it. Weeks turned into months. Funding began to disappear. Confidence faded. Some believed the entire expedition had become a waste of time buried beneath centuries of sand. Then came the staircase. At first, it appeared almost accidental, a single carved step emerging from the earth, then another, and another. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. This was no natural formation. A passageway descended into the mountain itself, sealed beneath debris untouched for centuries. As workers carefully uncovered the entrance below, archaeologists noticed something that made the entire site fall silent. Ancient royal seals still marked the doorway, unbroken. For the first time, they faced a terrifying possibility. The tomb beyond might still be intact. The deeper the staircase descended, the heavier the silence became. Every movement inside the excavation slowed to a careful rhythm. Brushes swept dust from stone, one grain at a time. Torches flickered against walls untouched since the age of the pharaohs. Even the air inside the passage felt different, trapped beneath the mountain for thousands of years. At the bottom of the stairway stood a sealed doorway. Ancient plaster stretched across the entrance like frozen time itself. Faint royal markings remained visible beneath layers of dirt and decay, pressed into the surface by officials of the 18th Dynasty more than 3 millennia earlier. To the archaeologists staring at it in disbelief, the meaning was unmistakable. No one had entered this tomb since ancient Egypt still ruled the Nile. Or at least, almost no one. Closer inspection revealed tiny fractures near the edge of the seal, signs that someone long ago may have attempted to force their way inside before the entrance was closed again. Grave robbers had haunted Egypt for centuries, tearing through royal burials in search of gold and precious artifacts. The fear now was that the chamber beyond had already been emptied long before modern history ever arrived. But there was only one way to know. The excavation team prepared to breach the doorway slowly, preserving every fragment of plaster and every symbol carved into the stone. Cameras were positioned, notes were written. The world beyond the tomb waited in breathless anticipation. Then the first opening appeared in the seal, a small gap cut through 30 centuries of darkness. Warm air escaped from the chamber beyond, carrying the scent of ancient dust and stone into the corridor. Torchlight crept through the opening, illuminating shadows no living person had seen for thousands of years. And inside the darkness, something gleamed. As the opening widened, the beam of torchlight pushed deeper into the chamber. For a moment, nobody spoke. The room beyond appeared frozen in time, as though the ancient world had been sealed away and left untouched beneath the desert. Dust drifted through the air like smoke. Wooden chests lined the walls. Fragments of gold reflected against the darkness. Statues of protective gods stood motionless beside the entrance, their painted faces staring outward after more than 3,000 years of silence. The archaeologists stepped carefully inside. Every inch of the tomb carried the weight of ritual. Ancient Egyptians believed death was not an ending, but a journey into another world. A pharaoh required weapons, food, treasures, sacred texts, and ceremonial objects to survive eternity itself. The burial chamber had been constructed not simply as a grave, but as a gateway into immortality, and much of it still remained. Pieces of furniture lay collapsed beneath age and pressure. Sealed jars rested in corners untouched. Faded hieroglyphs covered the walls, telling stories of gods guiding the dead through the afterlife. But at the center of the chamber stood the discovery that made the entire excavation fall silent: a massive sarcophagus. Its surface was coated in layers of dust and decay, yet traces of gold still shimmered beneath the torchlight. Symbols of royal power stretched across the stone lid. Cartouches bearing the name of a forgotten ruler emerged slowly as archaeologists cleaned the surface by hand. This was no minor burial. This was a pharaoh, a ruler from the legendary 18th Dynasty, hidden beneath the Valley of the Kings while entire civilizations rose and vanished above him. And as the inscriptions became clearer, researchers realized something even more astonishing. History may have been wrong about who this king truly was. For centuries, the pharaoh's identity had survived only in fragments. Broken inscriptions scattered across Egypt hinted at a ruler whose story had been buried beneath time itself. Historians debated the missing records for decades, unsure whether the king had been erased intentionally or simply lost within the chaos of a collapsing dynasty. But inside the tomb, the walls still remembered. As dust was carefully brushed away from the sarcophagus, ancient hieroglyphs began to emerge with startling clarity. Royal symbols stretched across the stone alongside prayers meant to guide the dead through eternity. Then came the cartouche, a name enclosed within the sacred oval of kingship. The chamber fell silent as archaeologists realized what they were seeing. The forgotten pharaoh was real. Every inscription inside the burial chamber added another piece to the puzzle. Scenes painted along the walls showed rituals honoring the ruler before the gods of the afterlife. Offerings of gold, alabaster, and carved ivory surrounded the tomb. Even damaged artifacts revealed traces of enormous wealth, proof that this burial once rivaled the grandeur of the greatest kings of the 18th Dynasty. Yet something else stood out: signs of fear. Some carvings appeared deliberately damaged. Certain royal symbols had been scratched away long ago. It was subtle, almost hidden beneath the artwork itself, but enough to suggest the pharaoh's memory had once been targeted after death. In ancient Egypt, that was no small act. To erase a ruler's name was to destroy their path into eternity. And suddenly, the tomb became more than an archaeological discovery. It became evidence of a forgotten struggle for power, buried beneath the sands for more than 3,000 years. The desert had not simply hidden this king. Someone had tried to make the world forget he ever existed. By the time the final artifacts were documented, the chamber no longer felt like a discovery. It felt like an intrusion into something deeply personal, something the ancient world had tried to keep sealed away, not just from robbers, but from history itself. Every surface of the tomb confirmed what the archaeologists now understood. This was not an ordinary burial lost to time. It was a carefully constructed passage into eternity, built for a pharaoh of the 18th Dynasty whose legacy had been fractured, rewritten, and partially erased across centuries of political upheaval. But the tomb had held. Despite thieves, collapse, and the slow pressure of time, the burial chamber remained largely intact. Offerings still rested where they had been placed. Ritual objects still lined the walls. Even the sarcophagus, though weathered, had never been fully breached. The desert had done what kings could not always guarantee in life. It had preserved him. And in that preservation came something even more powerful than treasure: truth. As researchers continued their work, the fragments of identity inside the chamber began to align with long-disputed historical records. A ruler once dismissed as lost or incomplete now stood confirmed through stone, gold, and ritual text. The missing name of the 18th Dynasty had finally been returned to the historical record, not as legend or speculation, but as physical reality carved into the walls of his own resting place. Outside the tomb, the world had changed countless times. Empires had risen and fallen. Languages had evolved. Entire civilizations had disappeared and been replaced. Yet, beneath the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, one king had remained exactly as he was left, waiting. Not for conquest, not for worship, but for remembrance. And as the final light was cast across the burial chamber, it became clear that this discovery was not about gold or power or even archaeology. It was about a name that refused to vanish. A pharaoh the desert had protected long enough for the modern world to finally remember him again.